Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is our TechFest Science Festival 2023. This year is our 30th anniversary for our festival, and we're so happy to bring such a variety of interesting and thought-provoking talks and presentations to you. As ever, all our thanks go out to our joint principal sponsors, BP, Shell, and also Equinor, who have kindly sponsored our public programme this year. Without further ado, I would like to welcome you all to this evening's event, which I'm sure you're going to find extremely interesting and very informative. I would like to introduce you to our speaker for this evening, Carl. So I will hand over to you, Carl, and I'll pop my camera off, but I'm here if you need me.
Okay, great, Lynn. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Carl Walz. I'm a former astronaut, recently worked for Oceaneering at the Space Systems Division down in Houston, Texas, and that's where I'm talking to you from today, is the Houston, Texas area. I'm still a consultant with Oceaneering, and I've been fortunate enough to get in a new spacesuit. I'll talk about that a little bit later, that we've been working on for NASA. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to start the presentation and talk a little bit about what it's like to fly in space, and then toward the end, talk about some of the other new things that are going on in human spaceflight, because it's very exciting. The space station continues to fly, but there's lots of other things going on as well. As you could see from the background, this is the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, and this is where astronauts train to do spacewalks. The pool is 200 foot by 100 foot, and it's 40 feet deep, and basically large chunks of the space station are represented as mock-ups underneath the surface. And so the astronauts train there in that water tank. So it's quite an interesting operation to watch some of this training happen. The crews are in their spacesuits. The spacesuits have weights so that they can be neutrally buoyant in the water. And then there's a small navy of divers that are there to assist the astronauts as they practice doing their spacewalks, and also to make sure that they're safe as well. So that's the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. Oceaneering has a number of employees represented there at their Neutral Buoyancy Lab. So I'm going to share my screen here, and should be able to see it now. Expedition 4 to the ISS. So just a short biography. I was born in the United States in Cleveland, Ohio. It's up on the sort of the northern part of our Midwest, commonly known as the Rust Belt now in the U.S., on the shores of Lake Erie. I attended Kent State University and John Carroll University, received my bachelor's in physics. I was also commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. I'd gone through an officer commissioning program through the university and the Air Force. And then the Air Force sent me back to graduate school, and I received my Master's of Science in Physics before reporting to my first assignment in California as a nuclear research officer. And at that time, I met people at McClellan Air Force Base who had applied to become an astronaut during the shuttle program. And I asked them, well, what's a good path to take? And they were kind enough to tell me and said, you need to apply to the Air Force Test Pilot School. You would apply as a flight test engineer. And if you're accepted there, go through the program, you'll be qualified then to apply to become an astronaut. And so that's exactly what I did. I attended Air Force Test Pilot School. We just had our 40th test pilot school class reunion just a couple weeks ago, and you know, test pilot school back 40 years ago had a lot of airplanes, a lot of fuel, so we did a lot of flying. So it was a great time to attend Edwards Air Force Base, and while I was there, I would watch the space shuttle land. So it was really cool. So and then I served as a flight test engineer after graduating from the school, worked at Edwards Air Force Base and then Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. I started sending in my applications. It took four tries to finally be accepted into the astronaut Group 13 in 1990. And it was a good time to be an astronaut. I was able to fly 3 space shuttle missions in the first 6 years I was there in Houston. And after that, things kind of slowed down because I was assigned to the one of the early space station missions, Expedition 4 of the space station program. At the time, I was going up, or the crews were exchanging via the space shuttle. So I flew up on STS-108, and then 6.5 months later returned on STS-111. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Just to give you an idea of where in the atmosphere of the space station flies, you know, of course, passenger airliners, they fly in something called the troposphere. You know, it's the closest part to Earth. That goes up to about 50,000 feet above the Earth. And then you get into the stratosphere. So weather balloons fly up there, as well as some very high altitude aircraft, things like the U-2, for example. And then you get into other regions of the atmosphere, the mesosphere, the thermosphere. Thermosphere is interesting because that's where the northern lights, the aurora borealis, is set up. And then you get to this exosphere, and that's where typically satellites and our human space flight occur. And so the space shuttle and the space station operate in what's called low Earth orbit, about 160 to 600 miles above the Earth, and that's kilometers, 260 to 960 kilometers. The ISS currently is in orbit at 250 miles or 400 kilometers above the Earth. What's been happening is a large number of satellite constellations are now operating either just below or just above the space station. So the Starlink, for example, that Elon Musk started, is operating, you know, just above the orbit of the space station. So there is some concern about the long-term viability of operating in low Earth orbit because of space debris from these new constellations, plus just the other space junk that's been up there since the beginning of the space age. So the U.S. and other countries are looking into what to do about space debris. It's a big challenge for us all. So, one of the exciting things about being an astronaut is launching into space. And so I had the chance to launch into space 4 times on the space shuttle. And it was an amazing trip. We went from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. You're on the launch pad, strapped to your seat. The space shuttle is bolted to the launch pad 6 seconds before you actually lift off. The main engines in the back of the space shuttle there will ignite, and then they come up to power, and then at T-minus 0 seconds, when the space shuttle is set to lift off. The solid rocket motors, those big white motors on the side, they ignite exploding bolts that hold the space shuttle down, explode to release the shuttle, and it just leaps off of the launch pad, and you're on your way. And because of the solid rocket motors, it's a very fast climb out from the launch pad, and it was incredibly noisy, even though you're inside of the spacecraft and you've got a helmet on and sound protection. There's still quite a bit of noise. You can hear actually as you accelerate the vibration of the or the sound of the atmosphere as it goes around the shuttle. So there's this kind of humming noise, and then of course you're shaking from the ignition of the rocket engines. So you go for about 2 minutes on the solid rocket motors primarily, and then those solid rocket motors run out of fuel, and they separate, and then you continue up to your orbital destination on the main engines on the shuttle. And so again, you go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in just about 8.5 minutes. Quite a ride. And then pretty much simultaneously, once the shuttle main engines cut off, you're in space, and you go from an acceleration of 3 times the force of gravity to 0 gravity almost instantaneously, and everything begins to float. So it's quite an amazing ride. So our destination was the space station. And I wanted to show this picture. This is what the space station looks like today. It is really, really big. These vertical structures are solar panels that provide the power, the electrical power for the space station. You have these other kind of smaller vertical panels. Those are radiators, because the space station generates a lot of heat, and that has to be removed from the inside of the space station. And then you have these areas here in front. They're cylindrical, and that's the areas that are inhabited by the crew members. Sort of in the front of this sort of horizontal truss is a segment provided by the U.S. and its European, Japanese, and Canadian partners. And then in the sort of behind there are elements provided by the Russian Federation, which is another partner. Right now, Expedition 70 is on board, and it's pretty incredible. We have 3 Russian crew members back there, and then we have 2 U.S. Laurel O'Hara and Jasmine Mogbelli. We have a Japanese, and then Andreas Mortensen from Denmark is there as the commander. So it's a very international crew on board the station right now. As I said, it's really big. If you superimpose the space station on a football pitch, it would easily fit there, and it's about 1 million pounds, so roughly 500,000 kilograms. Again, 17,500 miles, operating, roughly 250 miles, 400 kilometers above the Earth. At that altitude, we get 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets a day, and it is an operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, in December of 2001, the space station wasn't quite that big. And this is what I saw as we approached the International Space Station. We had just one of those large solar panels. We had one radiator. These solar panels here are from the Russian elements of the space station. By far, the most of the pressurized volume was in the Russian segment at that time. So here's our Expedition 4 crew. Yuri Onofrienko was our commander, and he had spent previously 193 days on the Russian Mir station. And then Dan Bursch, my colleague over here, he and I flew together on our first spaceflight missions on STS-51. He was also in my astronaut class, the 1990 class. And we both flew together, or we both flew then on 2 other missions. I was fortunate in that I flew to the internet or to the Russian Mir station on STS-79, so I had a chance to see what a space station looked like. That was basically built in Russia. And so I was familiar when I got to the International Space Station with the Russian parts of the station. And this picture is taken inside the U.S. laboratory where we performed a number of physical science and life science experiments. Here's just a view. This is kind of the border between the U.S. and the Russian segments. If you fly through this tunnel and through that hatch there, you're into the Russian segment. I had a chance to fly some memorabilia from my university. So a picture with my Kent State sweatshirt there. So I mentioned life science experiments. We grew some cell cultures while I was up there. We also did a lot of experiments, human experiments on ourselves. And so this is an experiment looking at changes in your reflexes in microgravity. When you're in this microgravity environment, there's no gravity pulling on your body, sort of pulling it down to the earth. And so your spine actually elongates. And so the idea was that if you added a stimulation to your lower leg, that the reflex would change. And so I wasn't, unfortunately, I wasn't a very good subject. And so, even though my spine elongated, it didn't really change the reflex, but I was basically putting an electric current into my leg, just a jolt to see if my leg would kick, which would be something called the Hoffman reflex. So it's the same reflex that you get, when a doctor takes a little hammer and hits your kneecap. So, and mine is fairly damped, and it was damped in space. So no big change there. So this is it's an interesting experiment because I was, sort of ramping up the current to see if there was any changes. There wasn't, except that, the current kept, shocking me. The Russians had their own experimental protocols that the U.S. guys didn't participate in. It was pretty elaborate. So you could see that Yuri is wired up, from head to toe, basically. He's in a device, this gray and red device here, actually pulled a vacuum on the lower part of his body, or reduced pressure on his lower part of his body. And all this equipment that's on attached to him is measuring changes to his physiology when that vacuum is on. So it was quite a quite an ordeal for Yuri, and I'm glad that I didn't have to participate in that one. We did a total of 3 spacewalks while we were in space. We did 2 spacewalks in the Russian spacesuit, and then Dan and I went out and did a US EVA, US spacewalk, to prepare for the addition of extra hardware to the space station. So we were doing the setup for the next shuttle that was coming to provide the first external truss. Our spacesuits here, were, I won't say they were comfortable, but they were sized to fit us fairly well, and provided our own little spacecraft when we would go out through the airlock. The airlock is in here. This picture was taken during a rehearsal. Airlocks at that time, basically were storage areas when we weren't doing spacewalks. And so there's a lot of gear in there that we would have to pull out so that we could fit in there with our spacesuits. We operated robotic arm, and so we had controls at that time in the US laboratory. These controls or one of these controls has since moved out into the cupola of the space station. But this is Ellen Ochoa, another classmate of mine and former director of Johnson Space Center. She and I were working together, moving crew members around the space station using the robotic arm. So I had to stay in shape while I was up in space. When you are in that microgravity environment, your body tends to shed calcium from your bones, and also the muscles, the anti-gravity muscles in your back and your legs, they start to atrophy when you're in space. So we had to exercise. We would do resistive exercise pretty much every day, and then we had a treadmill and a bicycle that we could ride on to provide aerobic training. And so it was called the interim resistive exercise device. Interim because they were working on a better solution, but this was the first thing that they had ready for us. And I still lost some bone and some muscle while I was up there, even though I exercised every day. Incidentally, behind me in this picture are bags of water. The space station receives its electricity from the solar panels, and then converts water into oxygen that we can breathe. And so we needed the water there to provide not only water to drink and to bathe, but also to provide oxygen to breathe. So speaking of oxygen, the thing that used the water to generate oxygen was this thing called the oxygen generator. This was in the Russian segment, and about 2/3 of the way through our flight, the oxygen generator stopped generating oxygen. So fortunately, we had quite a bit within the pressurized volume. Plus, we had some other sources of oxygen, but this was our primary source. So Yuri and I removed the oxygen generator, and then fortunately, we had a spare that we were able to bring out and install in its place. Even installing it, though, turned out it was what we installed was a little bit different than what we removed. And so it took another few days for this for the new oxygen generator to actually operate and provide the oxygen at the level that we need it. And this gives a pretty good look of it's called the service module. This is where we commanded the Russian segment of the space station, and we also had living quarters there. So we conducted experiments, we did spacewalks, we operated the robotic arm, but you still have the everyday things. You have to wash up, you have to eat, and then you also tend to generate trash. And so these cans had liquid waste from the toilet, and then also solid waste from the toilet. And these then would be put into the unmanned supply vehicle, which is called the Progress. And the Progress would bring up new supplies that we would unload, and then we take the trash and we put the trash in the Progress. Once the Progress was full, we would send it off and it would burn up in the atmosphere. So we saw some great views of the Earth, and this is a view of southern Scotland, looking at Glasgow here, Firth of Forth. Just a great view, a clear day from space. So, and then this is the Scottish Highlands. If I go to the next slide there, you could see Loch Ness and Inverness, Fort William, and then the Isle of Skye over there. So just a really, really great view from space of Scotland. And then certainly we had other great views as well. So we did have some time. You can't work all the time in space, so we would typically work about 10-11 hours a day, and then we'd sleep for about 8, and we would have a couple of hours where we had some time to enjoy some recreation. And so when I flew up, I played keyboard, and so because we had the shuttle, we carry some big stuff, so I carried a keyboard up there. The guitar was up on board the station, and so during a visit of the STS-111 crew, we had a little concert. Ken Cockrell, who is commander of STS-111, he and I played together in the astronaut band Max Q. And so he was playing the keyboards, I was playing the guitar, and we were doing a rendition of the Van Morrison song "Brown Eyed Girl" on the space shuttle. So it was a lot of fun. This is a picture of our Expedition 3 crew, which was here, and the Expedition 4 crew here, and in between are the STS-108 crew members that went up and down with the shuttle. So it was when we were doing crew exchanges on the space shuttle, the upgoing crew would be there with 4 shuttle crew members who stayed with the shuttle, and then we exchanged places basically with the Expedition 3 guys. We had dinners together. At the time we were on board the station, we always ate together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is sort of a special occasion. We added an extra sort of an extra leaf on the table there, so that we could provide places for everyone to have their food. And anyway, it was really cool to be able to share a meal with shuttle crew. We had Russian, U.S., and some Japanese cuisine. Dan Tani, who had a Japanese heritage, brought Japanese food along, and so this is our meal to share here. And this again is in the Russian segment in the service module. This area that I'm kind of halfway popping out of was my home for 6.5 months when I was in space. We had these little, they look like, you know, small closets, and that's where we would sleep while we were up in space. So we would have sleeping bags. They were attached to the wall, and they kept us warm and kept us from floating around while we were sleeping. So I wanted to touch on what is going on in human spaceflight. And as we know, the space station is still going strong after, golly, 22 years. So the first crew arrived on the space station November 1st of the year 2000. So it's been 23 years now that we've had people on board the space station. So there was time after the Columbia accident where there were only 2 people on board the space station, but that was enough to keep it going. But in addition to space station, there's a lot of other things going on. Commercial astronaut launches is something brand new. Elon Musk has, you know, basically been doing this now since I think about 2018, launching crew members on the Crew Dragon on the Falcon 9 from Kennedy Space Center. You're probably familiar with these very striking white spacesuits that the crews wear, and so SpaceX offers this service to NASA. So instead of NASA launching the crews into space, it's actually SpaceX that's doing that under NASA supervision. But SpaceX can also launch other people to space too, and so they're if you have the money, you can fly to space. There's a person that is planning to fly a series of missions. He's already flown one already, the Inspire 1 mission, and basically fully bankrolled by this individual. And then other countries are planning to fly similar missions where the country space agency, you know, picks up the tab for the launch and the flight. So what I've heard is the UK is planning to do this at some point in time, as well as the European country Hungary is planning to do this as well. So they have to get financing, of course, but you know, that's the commercial launch industry enables a lot of new things that are, you know, very different than when I was flying. And of course, NASA still launching their crews. You may have heard of the Artemis missions. So NASA is developing a program to return astronauts to the moon and return them safely. So Artemis 1 mission was an unmanned mission that flew from the Earth, on the left there, to the moon, and actually beyond the moon to something called a distant retrograde orbit. And it was quite an exciting mission. You know, it was the first launch of the Space Launch System. I'll show that in a second. And then also the Orion capsule, and both performed flawlessly. Pictures of the moon were just magnificent. And, you know, we're preparing to launch the first crew of astronauts to this distant retrograde orbit. So it's actually farther than the Apollo crews traveled when they traveled to the moon. Space Launch System, for the longest time, all we had were animations of the Space Launch System. We finally had a you know a launch to show. That's this picture here. The heritage of this rocket is very closely tied to the space shuttle. This tank is just an elongation of the tank that flew on the space shuttle. Solid rocket motors are very similar. They're a little bit longer, but essentially the same technology as the solid rocket motors on the shuttle. The engines down beneath the stage here are space shuttle main engines that have been modified to support the launch of this rocket. And then up on top there is the Orion capsule. The Orion capsule is developed by NASA. It also has the European Space Agency is providing the service module back here. And then this was a picture from one of the solar panels on the Orion. Took a picture of the Earth there and the moon. This was at that 38,000 feet past the moon. So just a stunning view. And yes, the Earth is round. And then this is a view of the Orion after splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. There are these flotation bags to ensure that the capsule remains upright after it lands. And Oceaneering developed these uprighting bags. So worked with the folks on the oil and gas side to come up with a solution for Lockheed Martin, who's the contractor for the Orion. So NASA recently named the Artemis II mission crew, Reed Wiseman and Victor Glover, commander and pilot. They're Reed and Victor. They're veterans of the International Space Station. In addition, Christina Koch is going to be flying as well. Christina spent over 300 days on the space station on her first mission. And then we're also flying a Canadian, Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency. That's Jeremy there. So off the bat, an international crew. And on following Artemis missions, astronauts are planned to land on the lunar surface. Right now, NASA has a contract with SpaceX to develop a lunar lander. So this is an artist's conception of what that lunar lander looks like. It's really big and it's really tall. You can see the little people down at the bottom. So scheduled for launch sometime in the mid-2020s. NASA has actually two teams, one headed by SpaceX and Elon Musk, the other headed by Blue Origin and Jeff Bezos. They're both of those entrepreneurs are investing in this development, and they'll carry two crew members to the surface for up to 6.5 days. As I mentioned, SpaceX is going to provide the Artemis 3 and 4 missions, and then Blue Origin was selected earlier this year, and they'll provide services for the Artemis 5 and subsequent missions. So, NASA has big plans, and we're looking forward to Artemis really taking off. I mentioned spacesuits early on. So the spacesuit that I did my spacewalks in is now about 40 years old. So it's, those need to be replaced. So NASA is working to develop spacesuits. They're actually buying spacesuits as a service, sort of similar to commercial space launch. It's going to be a commercial spacesuit, I guess leasing, if you will. This is a spacesuit being developed by Collins Aerospace. Sort of large subs are Oceaneering and ILC Dover. And I had a chance to get in this suit, and it's a great suit. It fits very comfortably, both in the shoulders, has a new system for the shoulders, as well as a lower torso that allows crew members to be able to walk efficiently on planetary surfaces. So the Collins suit will be initially tested on the space station, and then there's another company that's building a lunar suit primarily for the first lunar mission, and then NASA will compete spacesuits for follow-on missions. So it's a pretty interesting, very complex procurement that NASA is engaging in. And in addition to lunar landers, NASA is planning something called the Lunar Gateway. It's beyond the ISS and beyond low Earth orbit. It is in a elliptical orbit around the moon, and it will orbit the Earth in a period of 6.5 days. And so hence the 6.5 days on the lunar surface for the cruise. So it's quite an endeavor. Much of this, or at least the first part of the gateway, is being built right now. Of course, the Orion is being readied as well, and then other elements will be showing up later. So it's very much going to be assembly similar to the space station, but in lunar orbit. So it's quite a big challenge for NASA. And that concludes my formal remarks, and I would be happy to take questions.